The Bataan Death March, from past to present.
The Bataan Death March began on April 10, 1942, and lasted approximately 6 to 9 days. It began in Mariveles, Bataan, in the Philippines, and ended at Camp O'Donnell in Tarlac, the Philippines. The POWs were mostly Filipino and American soldiers who were forced on the march by the Japanese Imperial Army. There were approximately 75,000 POWs and between 700 and 11,000 deaths.
This is a map of the march that lasted approximately 80 miles over 6 to 9 days between Mariveles and Camp O'Donnell.
Alistair Urquhart was a member of the Scottish Gordon Highlanders. The Gordon Highlanders occupied Singapore from 1939 to December 1941 until they were captured by the Japanese. His experiences marked the extremities of what a POW could have experienced. While dealing with the many hardships of prison life, he survived the work on Hell's Pass, the bridge on the River Kauai, and the torpedoing of the Japanese prison hell ships. For Urquhart, the death march started when he left Changi to travel to Kenyu. The Japanese called Maeklong a rest camp, however, it was no such thing. Kenyu was a work camp and was focused on the construction of Hell's Pass, a railway. Urquhart was taken to Kenyu by transport in a steel carriage system by train. He explained, "Animals would not be transported like this. To make matters worse, the sides of the steel carriage were searingly hot. They burned any bare skin that touched them. We stood there for hours before the train started moving. The heat was appalling. Dehydration set in quickly. The smell inside the carriage became unbearably foul. Without toilets, the men had to relieve themselves where they stood." After the transport, the prisoners began the march. A small rest was provided with a meal break. However, the exhaustion of the transport was far too enduring for many. Urquhart explained, "We had a 55-kilometer march ahead of us. Starting immediately to be completed that night, about 600 prisoners, diseased, vermin-infested, and at our lowest ebb, began that march. The prisoners would be set up into columns in which the guards would follow. Any stragglers were beat with the butts of rifles and prodded with bayonets. Some prisoners believed that being placed in the back of the line was a death sentence. In the back of the line, one was more susceptible to falling behind because one was not pushed forward by their peers. Being placed in the back of the line also made it more likely that one would be beaten by a guard." Regarding the death march, a surviving POW, Alfred Bourgeot, recounted the following. "Well, when Bataan surrendered, they gathered all of us in Mariveles, Bataan, and they told us that we had to march all the way to San Fernando, Pampanga, because we were all going to be accounted for and taken to prison camps. Of course, the Americans that were there were made to walk on the right side of the street to distinguish them from the Filipinos, and on the left side were all the Filipino troops. Unfortunately, as you see me, I was mistaken very many times as not being a Filipino. And always I was yanked out and put in the American group, and there, of course, I got slapped so many times for crossing, but I knew very well inside of me, I said, I am sure they are going to treat the Americans in a worse way than they are going to treat the Filipinos. And all along they started saying, 'Well, you Filipinos, you know, you should have been on our side. Why are you fighting those Americans anyways? There is no chance of them winning this war.' When asked if he had witnessed cruelty, Bourgeot responded, 'Oh, yes. For example, if you should not want to walk anymore. Let's say you were tired. Well, I've seen them shoot walking prisoners of war, actually be shot. Or if you tried to get food, which was thrown by the civilians to the walking military, the Filipino military, that was not only endangered you, but the one who was giving the food or throwing the food to you. Well, those that they could catch, they'd just shoot them there. If you could not keep up with the group in the death march, rather than slow the death march, they'd get rid of you by shooting you. Oh, they bayoneted people, they shot people, and if they think that you were delaying the death march, you were dead.'" Alf Larson served in the U.S. Army Air Corps during the war. He lived through the numerous accounts that could have cost his life. His plane was shot down by the Japanese, yet he survived. He endured the Battle of Bataan for close to 6 months that involved a lack of supplies, ammunition, equipment, and starvation, and survived. Shortly after the surrender, he was captured and became a prisoner of the Imperial Japanese Army. He survived the brutal death march and 2 inhumane Japanese concentration camps. He was forced to sail to Japan in a hell ship. Even though the repeated torture and forceful labor, he survived and eventually made it home in November 1945. He is a true war hero. On the first day, I saw 2 things I will never forget. A Filipino man had been beheaded. His body lay on the ground with blood everywhere. His head was shot a short distance away. Also, there was a dead Filipino woman with her legs spread apart and her dress pulled over her head. She obviously had been raped, and there was a bamboo stake in her private area. These are the instances I will like to forget. If anyone had to go to the bathroom, they went right in their drawers as they walked. If you stopped or got off to the side, you would have been bayoneted or shot. I didn't go to the bathroom because I had nothing to pass. Body fluid came out in sweat. I didn't recall going to the bathroom until we got up to Camp O'Donnell. The first time I urinated, I thought I was going to die. It burned like sin. We had been starved for such a long time. We were really run down. We looked like a bunch of stragglers. We didn't get anything to eat for 4 days. Along the way, Filipinos would try to give us food. The Japanese shot some of them. Finally, the last 2 days, everyone got 1 rice ball each day to eat. American soldiers were buried alive in slit trenches, which were used for bathroom facilities. When the trenches were almost full, the Japanese would take a detail of prisoners to fill them up with dirt. On one occasion, I saw a soldier who had diarrhea really bad and went to the bathroom. After he finished, he could barely get up. He slipped and fell backwards into the trench. The Japanese ordered the prisoner detail to cover him up right there, which they did. They had no choice. As we walked along, we could see the bodies of decomposing American soldiers and Filipino women who had been mutilated and obviously raped. Once the march started, everything just sort of froze in my mind. I was pretty numb the whole time. I didn't think and I didn't feel. I was like a robot and just kept moving. Either than daylight or dark, I lost all track of time. I had to blame everything out and focus straight ahead. I lived from day to day, in fact, hour to hour. The only thing I thought about was the moment and, the good Lord willing, I'll get through the day. Colonel Dyes was killed in a crash of his fighter plane at Burbank, California, while he was preparing to go back and fight the Japanese who had tortured him. Here are some statements he made about the Bataan Death March. At 3 o'clock, we were introduced to a form as the sun treatment. We were made to sit in the boiling sun all day long without cover. We had a very little water. Our thirst was intense. Many of us went crazy and several died. The Japanese dragged out the sick and delirious. 3 Filipino and 3 American soldiers were buried while still alive. I made that march of about 85 miles in 6 days on 1 mess kit of rice. Other Americans made the March of Death in 12 days without any food whatsoever. Much of the time, of course, they were given the sun treatment along the way. Men shrank from 200 pounds to 90. They had no buttocks. They were human skeletons. It was plain and simple starvation. It was difficult to look at a man lying still and determine whether he was dead or alive. Another surviving POW, Richard Gordon, said the following about his experience with the Death March. I didn't come down with the surrender group. They caught me actually 2 days after the surrender took place. First thing I did was receive a good beating, and everything I had in my wallet, in my pockets, was taken from me. And as I was marched down that road, where they captured me, I passed my battalion commander, Major James Ivy, and he had been tied to a tree and he was stripped to the waist, and he was just covered with bayonet holes. He was dead, obviously, and he had bled profusely. He had been bayoneted by many, many bayonets, and that's when I knew that we had some trouble on our hands. We were in for deep trouble, and they brought us down into a staging area and put me in with the rest of the thousands that were assembled on the side of the road, and that's where I spent my first night. He later said, as we were marching out of Bataan, men were very desperate for water. and they would break ranks, and the Japanese wouldn't tolerate that. And they'd run to the side of the road to get some water, and along the side of the road would be caribou wallows, or the puddles of water that the caribou used to wallow in. So they'd keep away flies and mosquitoes, and the Americans and the Filipinos both would actually lap up that water like a kitten would lap up milk. And of course, the water was contaminated, so many of them became very ill as a result of drinking that. Several who break ranks, who would be shot by the Japanese, were part of that detail. I saw a beheading of a Filipino who had broken ranks and ran for that type of water. So killing, yes, we saw a number of them along that march at different places. In regards to all POWs, the War Ministry issued the following documents from the Taiwan POW headquarters. The documents were used in post-war war crime trials against Japan. The section regarding the treatment of POWs was stated as follows. Under the present situation, if there were a mere explosion or fire, a shelter for the time being could be nearly buildings, such as a school, a warehouse, or the like. However, at such time as the situation became urgent, and it would be extremely important, the POWs will be concentrated and combined in their present location, and under heavy guard, the preparation for the final disposition will be made. The time and method of disposition are as follows. The time. Although the basic aim is to act under superior orders, individual disposition may be made in the following circumstances: when an uprising of large numbers cannot be suppressed without the use of firearms, when escapees from the camp may turn into a hostile fighting force. 2. The methods. Whether they are destroyed individually or in groups, or however it is done, with mass bombing, poisonous smoke, poisons, drowning, decapitation, or what, dispose of them as the situation dictates. In any case, it is the aim not to allow the escape of one single, to annihilate them all, and to not leave any traces. To the Commanding General of Military Police, reported matters conferred on with the 11th Unit, the Kirun Fortified Area, HQ, and each prefecture concerning the extreme security of the Taiwan POW camps. The two documents on the right are the original documents issued. Lester Tenney, who survived the march, made it his mission to get an apology from the Japanese. He was invited to deliver his request to the Japanese ambassador, who then presented the request to the Japanese government. In 2009, 67 years after the Bataan Death March, Japanese ambassador Ichiro Fujisaki traveled to the United States, apologized for the war crimes in his country committed. In his speech, Fujisaki said, as have repeatedly stated, the Japanese people should bear in mind that we must look into the past and to learn from the lessons of history, and offered his apologies for having caused tremendous damage and suffering to many people, including prisoners of war, those who have undergone tragic experiences. The Bataan Memorial Death March was started in 1989 by the Army ROTC program at New Mexico State University. In 1992, the New Mexico National Guard and White Sands Missile Range sponsored the march and moved it to the missile range. Currently, around 5,200 people participate in the march every year. While most of the participants are in the military, many civilians choose to undergo the trail as well. Their motives range from wanting to challenge themselves to honoring a lost family member or to simply fostering a spirit de corps in their units. There are two routes. The green route is 26.2 miles and allows participants to experience some of the conditions the POWs faced. The blue route is 14 miles and gives the others a chance to participate and honor them in a less physically demanding setting. It is important to remember this memorial march is nowhere near as demanding as the actual death march. However, participants are encouraged to help others along the way to better understand what the POWs went through and further enrich their experience. The men whose stories we have shared are just a few of the thousands of men who were imprisoned and killed in Bataan. This memorial honors their memory and strives to make sure that this horrific crime is not forgotten. It is important to remember that this is one of the many countless war crimes committed during World War II, not only by the Japanese, but also by other countries in both the Pacific and European theaters.